What's going on with Bitcoin is evolving faster than society can digest it. After 30, 40, 50 years, you look back and you say, well, of course we should have embraced the fire, the electricity, the wheel, the crude oil, the nuclear. I would say 95% of the decision makers in the finance world still don't really embrace or understand the idea of digital energy. I think when the administration says they want to be a global Bitcoin superpower, they mean they want the finance companies in the United States to lead the way. For every company in the world, in any capital market, they're always better off to buy Bitcoin as their capital asset. Yeah, well, I think the end game is we accumulate $1 trillion worth of Bitcoin, and then we grow that capital by issuing more credit.
All right. Well, we are here with Michael Saylor. Thanks so much for having us in your home. I'm really excited for this conversation. You've said that Bitcoin is hope. You own hope.com. You've made that a resource hub for Bitcoin education. Can you cast the vision of what is the hopeful part of Bitcoin? What's the world you want to live in? What kind of things change for the average person in a Bitcoin standard?
Well, if we look at the history of humanity, what has improved the human condition is technology. And the most formative technology that everybody's familiar with is fire. And fire, once upon a time, was hope. If you didn't have fire, you're going to freeze to death or starve to death. And then over time, other important technologies evolved. After fire, we mastered metals, and there was the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Steel Age. You know, the wheel was a pretty important technology. No wheel, no cars. Rockefeller commercialized chemical energy in the form of oil and standardized oil and called this company Standard Oil. And the real significance of oil was the humans got 1/10 of a horsepower. And now the little dinky engine on the back of your small trawler boat is 70 horsepower, which is 700 human beings. And a typical tender could have 1,000 horsepower. And so think about 10,000 people rowing as hard as they can behind a 30-foot boat. And that's what we got when we got oil and when we got internal combustion engines. And so the hope for humanity has always been technology in a new sphere of influence, whether it's automobiles or airplanes or electricity or oil or fire. Bitcoin is hope because Bitcoin represents digital energy. It represents energy in cyberspace. It represents digital property, digital capital, digital gold. But in its most profound setting, it means digital energy, a way to convey energy through time, through space, that is life-affirming for 8 billion people, for 400 million corporations, for millions and millions of institutions, for hundreds of countries, for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of municipalities. And if I were to say fire is hope, and you were shivering and freezing to death, you would get it. And if I were to say electricity is hope, and you were in New York City trapped on the 98th floor of a skyscraper or trying to get up to the 98th floor of a skyscraper, you would get it. And now when I say Bitcoin is hope, I mean Bitcoin is digital energy. And if you want to send energy at the speed of light from here to halfway around the earth to save the life or solve the problem of another human being or corporation, you're going to need digital energy. And so it represents the next paradigm shift, the next manifestation in the story of energy and the story of human beings harnessing energy in order to improve the quality of their lives.
And so as that transition sort of takes place and we move to a Bitcoin standard, or some people say hyper-Bitcoinization, what sort of signs are you looking for? What signs to watch that indicate like this actually is happening?
Well, I think we're really talking about the integration of digital energy into the civilization. So, what do you want to see? Well, let's start with the basic application of digital energy as capital, digital capital. There's a trend right now for publicly traded companies to recapitalize on Bitcoin. Our company was the first in 2020. Then there were 2 or 3. And then there were 10, and then there were 20, then there were 40. And about a year ago, there were 60. And then about 3 months ago, there were 120. And right now, there's more than 180. And I would expect that one way you know that the world is adopting Bitcoin is we go from 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 to 100,000. As some people have said, one day every company will be a Bitcoin treasury company. So recapitalizing companies on Bitcoin is one measure of adoption. I think another measure of adoption is building support for Bitcoin into software applications. So, right now you have applications that run on iPhones or Android phones like Cash App that have Bitcoin in them. You have wallets that support Bitcoin, but I look forward to the day when Apple builds it into the iPhone, when Google builds it into the Android operating system, when Microsoft builds it into the Microsoft operating systems. And it's either integral to the operating system of every consumer device, or it's integral to the hardware itself, and people start to integrate Bitcoin support into all the hardware devices that propagate throughout the world. And I think that'll be another really, really big sign.
So yeah, you mentioned 5 years in now. 5 years ago, you kind of came onto the scene. No one really knew who you were in Bitcoin. Now, as you mentioned, you're kind of the leader of these Bitcoin treasury companies. Bitcoin corporations, we talk to a lot of these executives who are launching a Bitcoin strategy. There's now 14 different countries represented. And a lot of times what I hear is, this so-and-so wants to be the Saylor of, this country. How do you see yourself, I guess, in the space? Do you consider yourself a leader of this movement, so to speak?
I feel like we have a responsibility to set a good example and to support and nurture everybody else in the marketplace. So, we've tried new things, we've experimented, and I think we go out of our way to share our learnings. We've sponsored a Bitcoin for Corporations conference ever since we got into this space, and we published our playbook. We've open sourced what we're doing. We publish securities filings explaining exactly what we do, what we've learned. I think it's incumbent upon us to point out what we think works, what doesn't work. There are a lot of ways to approach this, and I think the inspirational part of this movement is that unlike a lot of other industries where there can be a winner and everybody else is a loser, Walmart wins, most retailers lose. Amazon wins and 20,000 retailers lose. Apple wins and 20,000 device manufacturers lose. There's a lot of that. In the Bitcoin ecosystem, everybody can win because we're all aligned with the common value system, and the base asset that we're using is Bitcoin, and there's only going to be 21 million or less. And the network is the Bitcoin network. And so the growth and the success of a Bitcoin treasury company, or even just a company that is holding Bitcoin in its treasury, we could just refer to any normal company that's got some Bitcoin. Any of those corporations adopting Bitcoin to any degree is beneficial to Bitcoin, to the entire network, and to every other company in the movement. So I think it's been very gratifying to see the growth of the industry. We do our part. I think there are a lot of great contributions made by other companies, and every day I read about another company trying a different strategy, and I think we're all learning together. And when companies try something and it works well, I think you'll see adoption. And when companies try things and they're suboptimal, then we'll know not to do that thing. And so it's definitely a team effort.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the FUD or the critics. There's some skeptics out there. Some might call them haters of strategy and kind of the work that you do. Is there a critique or a misunderstanding of your work that kind of stands out?
I think when an airfoil moves faster than the speed of sound, like an airplane goes faster than the speed of sound, it creates a shock wave and a sonic boom. And it's very loud, it's very noisy, it's very turbulent. And what's going on when you're going faster than the speed of sound is you're going faster than the rate at which air can communicate to the air in front of it, right? The molecules in front of your fuselage are not able to communicate to the molecules 100 meters in front of you. So you end up with this sonic boom and massive turbulence and massive noise and chaos. What's going on with Bitcoin is evolving faster than a society can digest it. And so I think you could say this is all consistent. Bitcoin was misunderstood in the year 2011. It was misunderstood by me in the year 2013. It was misunderstood again in 2015, 2017, 2019, 2021. When we first got into the space in 2020, there were people that misunderstood it, and we had a massive amount of criticism when our stock was $10 a share. When our stock went to $100 a share, it was massive amount of criticism again. When it crashed to $20 a share, there was still massive criticism. When we had $2 billion of Bitcoin, people were cackling, or $1 billion, saying, oh, you lost $1 billion on this. When we made 100 billion, everybody disappeared and slunk into the shadows. And then a new set of trolls, a new set of critics came out when our market cap went above 100 billion. It's a different set of cynics, a different set of critics, a different set of misconceptions. I think you're going to see the ebb and flow of that set of misconceptions and that anxiety. It'll continue when Bitcoin is 100,000. It'll continue when Bitcoin is 1 million. It'll continue when Bitcoin is 10 million. It'll continue when Bitcoin goes to 20 million. And there's always going to be a new narrative of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It'll be a different generation. The people that used to laugh and say, oh, yeah, you lost $1 billion trading in Bitcoin, they're gone. They disappeared, right? There'll be a new generation of people that say, do you think it makes sense to buy Bitcoin at $1 million a coin? It's going to trade down to 500,000, right? And then there'll be a set of people that will say, you're buying it at 10 million a coin, it's going to trade to 6 million, you moron, you lost so much money. This is how societies deal with new ideas. If you study paradigm shifts, how long did it take to embrace electricity? How long did people thought John D. Rockefeller was crazy for 30 years until he was the richest man in the world. Mm-hmm. And then and at the point that he was the richest man in the world, people thought, well, that trade is done. And that was just when they invented the automobile and he got 10 times richer, right? And so the society doesn't really deal with paradigm shifts that well in near term, but after 30, 40, 50 years, you look back and you say, well, of course we should have embraced the fire, the electricity, the wheel, the crude oil, the nuclear, even nuclear power right now, for example. Nuclear power has only become cool or useful in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so for 50 years, people thought nuclear power was an awful thing. And all of a sudden they woke up and they realized that I guess we need nuclear energy to power the AI data centers to make us super intelligent. And if we don't turn it on, we're going to be slow and stupid. So, if it took them 50 years, by the way, nuclear power is like unlimited, clean, free energy. And they had to fight for 60 years to get people to embrace the idea of unlimited clean energy. It doesn't surprise me that there'll be skeptics about digital energy. They won't get it. Max Planck said, science advances one funeral at a time. And what he meant was the old guard, they will never, ever accept a new idea. Whatever it is, they'll die. They will not accept a new idea. The only way you get people to accept a new idea is you wait for a new generation of decision makers, and the old guard retires and they age out. Or you need a war. And people that don't believe in aircraft, but to start believing in aircraft when the aircraft flies over their city and drops a bomb on their head. And people that don't believe in atomic energy start believing in atomic energy if someone sets off a nuclear warhead in the middle of a war. And so I think that disruptive, profound events like a near-death experience like during COVID, I think that introduces new ideas and new paradigms. That's how we got introduced into this space. It was the war on currency and the war on COVID in 2020 that caused us to open our eyes and embrace the new idea. I would say 95% of the decision makers in the finance world still don't really embrace or understand the idea of digital energy, digital capital, digital money. And I don't think it's a bad thing, because the only way you're going to make 10 to 100x your money is if you pick the right thing and everybody disagrees with you.
Yeah.
If everybody agrees with you and you do the right thing, well, everybody agreed you should buy Amazon in the year 2020 during the lockdowns because it was quite obvious that you needed Amazon during the lockdowns. It's the worst investment of the past 5 years because everybody agreed that it was a good investment, and there's a lesson in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see if there's a tipping point where everyone starts to come around, kind of like what you're saying. Sounds like you've seen that too, where skeptics maybe started 5 years ago. Now they're kind of proving them wrong. And a lot of the kind of what you're speaking to is the old guard, the banking industry. What about skepticism within the Bitcoin community specifically? Does any of that surprise you or stand out in particular?
It's a vocal community. There are a lot of opinions. People say Bitcoin is money for enemies. There's been skepticism in the Bitcoin community since before Bitcoin, right? One could argue that Bitcoin was born out of skepticism, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's deep in the ethos and the culture, the idea to question everything, slay your heroes, don't trust, verify. No. Right. So the whole idea of Bitcoin is, don't trust anybody, don't trust any institution. And so if you start asking the question, how do you create an economic protocol where you don't want to trust any of 8 billion people and any of 400 million companies and any government? That's an interesting question. I would say that skepticism has its place. It is motivational. But at some point, it can become, what is the word?
Counterproductive, maybe?
Counterproductive idealism, right? And the truth of the matter is, you do need to trust the company to create the airplane you fly in. You do need to trust the company that creates the car you drive in. You do need to trust the dentist at some point because you can't. And you do need to trust the doctor because you can't take your own appendix out, or at least it's very rare, right? And so at some point, you do have to trust something. And I would say, the more evolved way to look at Bitcoin is not that you want to embrace it and never trust anything. The real inspiration and the promise of Bitcoin is once you've embraced it, you have the option to extend and withdraw your trust, from time to time. And if you choose to not trust the government, you can relocate your Bitcoin to a different country. And if you choose to trust a custodian, you can locate your Bitcoin with them. And when you decide to stop trusting them, you can relocate your Bitcoin to any of 100,000 other entities. Or if you go through a period of life when you choose not to trust anyone, you can self-custody. And when you decide you don't trust yourself, you can transfer your custody to another family member, right? And change. So the real power of Bitcoin is optionality. And the reason we have the optionality is because the entire movement was born out of distrust. And so there is a yin and the yang. There is a dialectic here. And you need a healthy degree of skepticism and distrust and cynicism. But once you've created the technology, you're not going to reach your full potential unless you work with other human beings, right? And so ultimately, when you decide that you're going to work with other human beings, either as a trusted custodian or a trusted hardware device manufacturer or a trusted hardware wallet, or you work with another corporation that's a trusted team of people, whether they, work on your teeth or work on your heart or manufacture the food or provide you with the aircraft, travel you need. At that point, you can reach your full potential and you do it empowered, with property rights and with economic rights. And the reason that you will be able to trust them is because you have the option to withdraw your trust. All right. So I look at it as the great deterrent. If you think about gold and why gold failed, one reason gold failed is it's so incredibly difficult to custody. And so if you look at in the history of gold, in the 1920s, you had 4 great central bankers, and the central banker in Germany was Schacht, and the central banker in the U.S. was Ben Strong. And the world, was substantially on a gold standard, and the Germans had gold. And the French had gold, and the British had gold, the Americans had gold. But for the most part, the gold was either in London or in New York. The French gold was with the British or the Americans, or the German gold was with the Americans. So there's a famous story where Schacht traveled to New York City, met with the head of the Fed, Ben Strong, and Ben Strong wanted to show him the German gold, took him down into the basement of the New York Fed, and they couldn't find the gold. And of course, the message of the story is this: gold is so difficult to custody, countries couldn't figure out how to, like the entire country of Germany couldn't figure out how to custody their own gold, much less the 100,000 companies in Germany or the 60 million people in Germany. And so the reason gold failed was it was too slow and too difficult to custody, and therefore your property rights were always going to be impaired by a central actor. And, imagine the entire world running on gold-based credit on a gold standard when all the gold in the world was sitting in London and New York City, and most of it was in New York City, and we can say, oh yeah, that's a bearer asset, but not really, because 40 million companies couldn't bear it. 400 million people couldn't bear it, right? And so Bitcoin, it represents the bearer instrument, but it really is practical for an individual to take custody, and it's practical for a company to take custody. And of course, I guess what I counsel to people that are idealists is they don't trust banks and they don't trust companies. But the point that I would make is during the entire gold era, gold was so difficult to handle that no company could custody their gold, and no bank could. If we lived in a world where 40,000 banks were custodians of Bitcoin, you would have evolved from a world where there were like 8 or 6 custodians of Bitcoin custodians of gold in the entire world, right? And so I think that Bitcoin offers a promise of economic integrity, and I don't think we should rail against a bank embracing Bitcoin.
No.
The truth of the matter is, if every country on earth embraced Bitcoin and the countries became the custodians of Bitcoin, and the only thing we accomplished was to have 150 countries custody Bitcoin, that would be more decentralized than the gold standard for hundreds of years, right? That would be it would be an order of magnitude more decentralized than we had under the gold standard. So what we're talking about is a world where if only banks and only governments custody Bitcoin, you would be 100x to 1,000x more decentralized. And if corporations in custody Bitcoin, you would be 10,000 times more decentralized. And of course, in a world where millions of individuals or tens or hundreds of millions of individuals self-custody, you're not like 1, 2, 3, 4 orders of magnitude more decentralized. You're like 6, 7, 8 more orders of magnitude more decentralized. So I tend to focus upon the fact that the worst case for the cynic is 1,000,000 times better than the best case we had 100 years ago, or even the best case we had ever,
right,
in terms of decentralized monetary integrity.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, staying on kind of a similar topic, the U.S. recently acquired 10% of Intel. There was, of course, a strong response from the community, as usual. Do you see any parallels between sort of this equity strategy and the current administration's stated goal of being, a global Bitcoin superpower?
No.
No parallels.
I think they're totally unrelated.
Okay.
I think when the administration says they want to be a global Bitcoin superpower, they mean they want to encourage banks to bank Bitcoin. They want our banking system to embrace it, to extend loans against it, to offer, yield or credit against it. They want to enable transactions. They want Apple and Google and Meta and Microsoft to support Bitcoin. They want public companies to be able to buy Bitcoin. They want an explosion and expansion of institutional grade Bitcoin custodians. They want favorable tax laws for Bitcoin, favorable security laws for Bitcoin, and they want the finance companies in the United States, whether it's BlackRock or whether it's Coinbase or whether it's Strategy or whether it's Block, they want the finance companies in the United States to lead the way in digital assets and digital capital and Bitcoin adoption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. One of the criticisms is, through a humanitarian lens, if corporations hold a large share of the Bitcoin, what does that mean for the average person? How do you, avoid crowding out small users?
Well, when we got involved, Bitcoin was trading $9,000 a coin. And today, Bitcoin's $115,000 a coin. And it got that way because our company bought 3%. And BlackRock enabled institutions to buy like 4%. And that means that 93% of the gain, and that's 93% of nearly $2 trillion. So $1.8 trillion went to the individuals that owned the Bitcoin before the corporations got involved. So the individual's not been crowded out. The individual just, if you posit that individuals, were the ones that owned the Bitcoin in the year 2020, then those individuals made $1.8 trillion since the corporations got involved. So the corporations aren't crowding out the individuals. The corporations are making the individuals that believed in Bitcoin insanely wealthy. And now the individuals can decide what do they want to do with that economic power, right? And they'll do whatever. As a practical matter, it seems to me that for our company, if we were to ever get to 5% of the network's going to be at least $1 million a coin. If we were to go beyond it, it's going to 10 million a coin. So when we get to 7% of the network, if we do, and Bitcoin is $10 million a coin, and if BlackRock keeps up with us, that means 85% of the network, right? And you're going to be talking about $200 trillion. So you're going to have $170 trillion that will flow to the individuals. So they're not exactly getting crowded out, right? If anything, what you've got is the corporations are all engines turning the flywheel of the Bitcoin economy. Every single company, every Bitcoin Treasury company that capitalizes on Bitcoin is like attaching a motor to the network. And every time that company buys $50 million worth of Bitcoin, they spin that drive shaft one turn. That's one day's natural supply, right? And so the more companies that come on, whether it's BlackRock or whether it's Strategy or whether it's MetaPlanet or whether it's 21 or whether it's BSTR, or, or whether it's similar, whoever it might be, each one of them is firing up a motor. All of the motors are powering up the network. If you're an individual and you believe in Bitcoin, you buy the Bitcoin, you cold storage the Bitcoin, and you let all the companies power up the network. If the companies didn't show up and the network was all individuals, Bitcoin would be trading $5,000 a coin.
No.
And here's the problem. It wouldn't just trade at $5,000 a coin, but the corporations, if they were to choose a different network to power up, if all the companies went to Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin or Ethereum or something else, Bitcoin would max out at 5,000 a coin and it would dwindle down to nothing because the companies would latch on to the next network, and then they would go to every government in China and Russia and Europe and South America and Africa and the US, and all the laws would be modified to benefit the other network and eventually squeeze the Bitcoin network out. So this is a protocol, and you could even say there's a protocol war, and it's a war to determine the future of money. And the war for the future of money is going to be fought and won with money. So in this particular case, it's the people that have the money are the institutional investors, and the people that can organize the money are the corporations. And if you want to win the monetary war, you need the institutions that control all the capital, and you need the corporations to get involved because you need the support of the government. The government can, with a stroke of a pen, right, block 99% of all the capital from flowing into a network, or they can enable it. And so I think the corporations are very important actors in this, right? They're the ones that are going to hire the lobbyists. They're the ones who are going to do the marketing. They're the ones that are going to defend the network and the individual, right, from having their Bitcoin seized, from having their Bitcoin shut down, or from having a 95% tax on the Bitcoin, right? The reason that'll happen is because the corporations are a line of defense. When I think about Bitcoin, I think the miners